Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Look who I've got here. It's the incredible John Paul. How are you, John?
Hello, Andy. I'm great, thank you.
Oh, we
Very
finally
good.
made it. We had a bit of a trouble trying to get into this Zoom meeting, haven't we?
Well, I'm not very technically proficient. That's why, I'm not quite come into the 21st century yet. But the
Oh,
sun is shining. It's a lovely spring day. So, lovely picture of You Are What You Is Zappa at the back there. I can see as well.
well, that little picture there is got. Shall I show you it? You wait
Go
there.
on,
You wait there.
go on.
Be impressed with this. Whoops, it's all tangled up. Next to my penguin, not in bondage.
Oh my goodness!
Look at
Wow.
that. To
Sorry.
Andrew, Frank Zappa.
Wow. When did you get that?
I wrote to him when I was probably when I was about 20. I wrote to him I got the Barking Pumpkin advert and address, just wrote to him. They didn't think I'd get anything back. So it was my birthday. I was a massive fan, blah, blah, blah. And he sent me to Andrew and I had a little badge. I lost it. He'd put happy birthday on a little badge and sent me a little badge with happy birthday written on it, like a sticker.
Right. Oh, that's lovely. A lovely thing to have.
So I assume you're a big Zappa fan as well.
Oh, huge. Absolutely huge. I discovered him when I was 15. It was one of those no going back moments, really. Yeah, no, I absolutely love him. But I got into him through the years before it came out anyway. It was 1985, and my then brother-in-law had recorded on a Betamax a gig, which was Halloween 1981, which has since been released. I think it's called The Torture Never Stops now, the DVD that you can get of it. But
That's the one
it
with the
was,
very young Steve Vai on there with the sort of leopard
that's
skin.
right.
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
it well.
exactly. Yeah, that's where it started for me.
So, John,
But,
you have played with some incredible bands. You're currently playing with Life Signs, which is one of the great
yeah.
bands on the prog bands on the scene at the moment. One of my favorite prog bands around at the moment. You've played with the
Oh,
Wild Hearts, but most importantly to viewers of my YouTube, you also were in Cardiacs uh,
yeah.
and played on one of my favorite albums of all time, Sing to God, which I've been chatting about on my channel. And Cardiacs are they're a bit left field for my channel, but I've started mentioning them. There's been a big response. So I'm so happy to have you here to tell us all about that. But I
Oh,
I want to know how you got there in the first place. I want to know how you ended up in Cardiacs and how you
yeah.
started playing. So do you want to fill us in a little bit of how you
Well,
ended up with that gig?
yeah. Well, it was how I joined the band.
Yeah, and basically how you started playing, what your influences. I mean, you were a Cardiacs fan before you got the gig, I assume.
I was, yeah. I mean, it was really weird. A very good friend of mine that I went to school with called Andy Allen. I went round his house when I was first getting to know him, and he was quite an important key player in all of this because he introduced me to Bob Leith, and he introduced us both to the music of Cardiacs. And but the funny thing is, I went over there and he showed me a copy of that Big Ship 12-inch,
Yeah,
EP sort of thing,
yeah.
and it's got this picture of them on the cover with all the makeup looking
Mm.
mental sort of thing. And the first thing I did was I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, that's horrible. I'm going to hate this. I thought it was disgusting. And the first thing he played me was Tarred and Feathered. And I was just like, my mind was blown because it was 1987 and there was just nothing else like that
So what were
around.
you into at that time? What music were you listening to?
I was listening. I was really into. I mean, yeah, the Zappa thing, obviously, we just talked about. But I also liked people like I like the whole Japan thing, Mick Karn and
Mm.
David Sylvian and all that stuff. And when and I was I was really into a band called It Bites. Do you remember
Yeah,
that
yeah,
band?
I know it bites. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so I was sort of, I don't know, I was becoming disillusioned with UK chart music, which I'd loved up until about 1985, and it gradually went off the boil. I mean, the magic years for me are probably 79 to 82 for really interesting, diverse chart music. So I was really into that, and then Cardiacs just came along and smacked me in the face, and I just got obsessed with them. But I didn't go and see them the first time till the end of '88, and then they became the only band I've ever travelled round to go and follow about on tour, you know, go and see them and stuff. And I was a huge fan. And I'd go along with Bob Leith, who became the drummer in Cardiacs years later. And we would just drive around going to see them. And we'd started up a little band called Ad Nauseam that were very kind of Cardiac influence, but we also had other influences like the It Bites thing, probably a bit of Level 42, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know? And we just were really into it at the time. And all that happened was we happened to turn up early to one of their gigs, and their manager Mark Walmsley let us in to the sound check, and we were like, wow. And so we watched them play. And the first person we met was Dominic Luckman, and we happened to have a cassette of our stuff with us, so we gave it to him, and he phoned us up afterwards saying, "This is amazing. Nobody else is doing this stuff at the moment." And so and then it kind of, the tape did the rounds amongst the band, and we became, you know, sort of friends. You know, I mean, only through going to gigs and chatting to them before, but we got on great, and I think they twigged that we weren't mental or anything, you know. And and then when Ad Nauseam did their first gig, which was in '91, Dominic came and sat in and played on one song, and Tim was in the audience with his then girlfriend, and Bick had just left the band, and the classic lineup had just folded, and they were looking to do this new thing with a 4-piece.
So do you know why the classic lineup did fold at that point?
Well, they all kind of gradually dropped off one by one because they just couldn't afford to be in a band anymore, because it wasn't a big money-making thing, particularly at that time, you know. And basically people had to just go off and get jobs and things like that. So one by one.
So was it like they were just getting older and adult life was catching up with them? And because it does happen, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember, you know, Tim Quay leaving. You know, I was always really sad when members left the band, you know. It's because you know, like Sarah went, but then Bick came along, Christian Hayes, you know, and he's brilliant. I mean, I love him, you know, he's a good mate and everything. And then and Tim Quay left. You know, he'd got himself a proper job and got married, and then Bill went, and then Bick. So at the time, I'm doing this gig, and unbeknown to me, this girl that Tim was with at the time was going, nick him, like that. And he was going, oh, no, I can't steal him off his band and stuff like that. So he was really kind of nice about it. But then I decided I'd just take a chance and phone him up and ask if I could audition. And he said, oh, well, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't have to audition. I mean, it goes without saying you'd be in the band like that. And I was like, what, really? You know, sort of thing. So he said, yeah, but he said, I need to run it by the others first, because apparently when he got Bick in the band, he just offered the job to Bick and didn't even check with the others. So, so he thought he'd probably better run it by him first. And I waited for about 3 days and thought, it's probably not going to happen. And then he called me and said, yeah, I've talked to the others. They're not really into it. So yeah, sorry. And I was just like, oh, no, that's fine, you know. And sort of, I just took it as that was what was happening. And it was like, no, not really. Come and meet us down the pub, Spice of Life pub in London, sort of thing. And I was like, oh, fucking hell, you know. And it was really, it was amazing for me, because I was 21 years old. I was a kid. I still lived with my parents. I wasn't very worldly. I hadn't been out much, you know, and only just really started doing proper gigs on a very small level. So it was, and then I'm just chucked straight into this, playing with my favourite band, you know, and you know, and at the time I was still pretty starstruck, you know, because Tim was my hero, you know, but you know, got wore off in the end, you know, sort of thing. But we became incredibly good friends, you know. I mean, everyone in the band, you know, we were, you know, I mean, I don't know what people think we were like, but really, I mean, we were just a bunch of hippies, really, you know, sort of thing, but just a bit more shouty and daft, you know, sort of thing. But,
it's an incredible band, and it seems like, you know, they're like an esoteric band, aren't they? They're like sort of, everybody in the know knows them, you know, and it's like this band where people couldn't, you you know, support themselves, and yet there was like so many famous people turning up to their gigs, such an influence on so many bands. It's
Yeah,
incredible, isn't it, really, when you look back?
it really is. You know, it's I still meet people to this day that they're like, oh wow, you're in Cardiacs, you know, which has been really useful occasionally, you know, because it's meant that I've been able to chat to some of my heroes. You know, like I recently met members of Zappa's band like Scott Tunis, Robert
Yeah.
Martin, and Mike Keneally, and I met them up that Prog cruise
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
edge thing. And so I just hung around with them for 5 days, you know, all matey and that, you know. I mean, within minutes of meeting Scott Tunis, we were both sharing escargot together, feeding it to each other. You know, but it was, yeah, it was really great fun though. Like, really good.
I heard about them years and years ago, and exactly like you, I ignored them. I thought I won't like this
Oh,
band. They'll be punky and they'll be noisy, and I won't like them. And eventually, when I've actually sat down to listen to them again, and that was probably about 20 years ago, and I thought, God, this is mad and complex. As time's
yeah.
gone on, I've realized there's something much deeper underneath it. A sort of, it's a strange Englishness which it's there's very poetic and
Oh,
quite
completely.
profound.
Yeah,
And I,
I mean, who, I mean, Tim was amazing. He's such a lovely, Tim Smith was such a lovely bloke, you know, and very easy to be around. And you'd be sat in a room with him and it'd make you feel like you were the only person that existed. And it would be just be filling your head with all this positivity and,
oh,
you
I think
know, and he was just a beautiful soul, you know. And, but he had this incredible imagination, you know. I mean, I don't know what a lot of the lyrics mean, but I don't think it always mattered. It was just these were things that just sounded good. There's a bit of, I don't know, poetry for want of a better word,
yeah,
sort of thing. But
to me it's like it's almost like he's like a mad court jester from the future. And he's sort of you've got life, and then he's like the court jester of modern life. And it's a very strange. I mean, when I first heard him, it was so complex and weird, and I thought this is cool. But as time's gone on, I've seen a depth there. And you know,
yeah,
when you come to a band a bit later, and you got to try and take the whole catalog in, and there's so much
yeah,
stuff. But as time
yeah,
has gone on, I have focused more on Sing to God as being the
wow,
album, and absolutely like it's a double album. It's so intense
yeah.
all the way through. I feel like there sounds like more of a band on there than the earlier albums. It sounds more organic. You know, some of the early albums sound a little bit drum machiney to me. I can't quite explain that, but
That's weird because if you reverse that, that's more like the truth. You know, like
yeah, yeah,
the early stuff that sounds like drum machine is actually real drums. You know,
yeah.
possibly
Is that true?
triggers. Yeah,
Oh,
things like I don't know. Do you know a track called RES? You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
like
yeah. I know that's
all
one of
that
my
stuff.
favorite tracks.
Yeah, yeah, that's all real. That's all real playing on Sing to God. It was all drum machine
Re
or programmed drums. Yeah,
really?
D4. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh my
It's
God, it's like
D4.
shows how much I know.
And also, I mean, for the majority of the album, it was only me and Tim that played on it. You know, Jim Smith played on about 4 tracks, I think. Bob did a load of backing vocals. I mean, we all did the backing vocals,
Mm.
but he wrote some words as well. Like I think he wrote about 90% of the lyrics to a track called "Dirty Boy." I think I heard you mentioned before.
Yeah, well, I
And
suppose one of the greatest songs ever written. I mean, it made my list of 10 greatest songs of all time. I just,
wow,
there's something just massively moving about it.
yeah,
there's just something I can't put my finger on. I think this is why I wanted to chat to you. And I really
yeah,
wanted to get into the process of how you made Sing to God, because it's different to the other
mm,
albums, because you were really involved, weren't you? You weren't
yeah.
just playing on it. You were involved in the
Well,
creation of it. So
yeah. I mean, previously before me, there'd been Bill Drake, and he'd brought a fair few ideas in, you know, and
yeah.
co-wrote a lot of the songs with Tim, you know, and or some of them, you know, and but it was still kind of Tim, as far as I know, Tim sort of doing all the arrangements and stuff, you know,
Mm.
and back then he would manuscript it for, I think sometimes for Bill and sometimes for Sarah, the sax player. But by the time it got to us, there was, I mean, I don't read music, so there was none of that going on. But no, what he would do, I mean, basically what happened was we set up the studio. We kind of moved it because he had it all in a shed at the end of his mum's garden in Chessington, and that's where we did our initial recordings. Because the first recording we did, which I don't really count as being the Sing to God session, but it was an EP which had the tracks Belly Eye, Horse's Tail, and No Gold on, and they were all recorded in that shed sort of thing, and that in early January '95, and I think it was June '95 that we just upped all the gear, took it over to Jim Smith's bass player's house in the country, and we set it all up there, and that to me is where Sing to God starts being made, sort of thing, and that's where the majority of the stuff got made. And the way it worked was Tim had programmed drum machine and an organ playing the chords and a vocal melody like that, and that's all he had. And he said to me, right, come up with riffs like that. So I sat there and came up. What I'd do is I'd get a little cassette of it. I'd go into the back garden, sit in the sun with a Walkman on, and I'd go through and come up with guitar riffs and bass riffs for a lot of the songs, you know, and things like Fiery Gun Hand, you know, and stuff like that, Dog Like Sparky and things. He basically gave me free rein to do what I wanted, really. I was really surprised because I knew how in control of the whole thing he'd been up until then, you know. So, so I would go in and stick down some bass, stick down some guitar. And then there were songs that I wrote that I think, one of them, Man Who, I think I just strummed on the guitar to him and sung it to him. I didn't even demo that one. It's the only one I never demoed. And he was like, yeah, all right, let's start. And we went in and just recorded all of that stuff from scratch, sort of thing. But it was there was a lot of free rein given to sort of just do what I wanted to do, sort of thing. But it was a great process, and it was really it was a real happy time. You know, we were all having a laugh doing it. And then we'd have parties at the weekend where we'd just invite all our mates over and do loads of drugs. But yeah, it was great. It was good.
Now, yeah, you sent me a message when we were chatting about doing this meeting. You said there's a lot of, like, you know, the fans make assumptions and make things up about the album. Is there anything you want to specifically set straight? Some of the stuff that gets said that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think some of the fans, the stranger ones, will sort of will kind of invent stuff as fact. You know, they'll say it's fact, invent it because it's what they want to believe. You know, it's a lot of the time it isn't. You know, I mean, one person said that Sing to God was a solo album that Tim did on his own, which is just not true at all. You know. And it was and things like because, you know, I was credited with, I think, guitar and keyboards, but I actually played like loads of bass on the album, and Tim played some bass as well. I think Jim played bass on about 4 songs in the end, sort of thing. It was just the 4 that we'd been doing live before, which were my songs, ironically, but he played bass on them. Not all of my ones, though. No, he didn't play on Horse's Tail, I don't think, or Man Who. But yeah, certainly Bell Stinks, Bell Clinks, and what was it called? Angleworm the Angel. It was called Perfect before. Yeah, and I think there's, you know, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, Jim's bass playing on this, or no, Tim did it all and everything, and it's just not true. You know, it's a real, what the beauty of that album more than any of them really is that it was such a collaboration, and it was a real happy one. It wasn't, there was no sort of ego involved. It was just sort of getting on with it, and really, really good fun. You know.
Yeah, it's that magical thing when things come together is really hard to explain to people, and everything just seems to be going so easy, you know. So what happened with your position in the band? Why did you go in the end?
Why did I leave?
Yeah.
Because again, it was the lack of work thing, really, because we weren't doing enough at the time. We were only like it got to the point where we every year we'd get together and play the Astoria, but we weren't doing anything else, and this dragged on for a good few years. In the meantime, it's like, well, I've got to go and do something else. So I joined. I started doing stuff with Ginger Wildheart, and then eventually joined the actual band, the Wild Hearts. And we got really busy. We were off touring with the Darkness, doing like America and Europe and stuff. And it was just getting to the point where it was going to clash if ever there was anything. And the final straw really was Tim got in touch with me and said, look, we're thinking of doing 3 gigs where we play all of the really early stuff that's never been recorded before, you know, all these kind of rare songs or songs that have only ever been recorded really badly that used to get sold like at gigs, like the stuff off Toy World and Obvious Identity, which were 2 cassette albums that they used to just flog off at gigs and stuff. So he said that to me. I was like, oh, okay. So, and then I sat down, went to start learning it and realized it's really strange, but I couldn't be bothered. I actually couldn't be arsed with it, sort of thing. And I had this thing in the back of my mind that, you know, what if things start to clash? What's going to go on? And I couldn't get myself motivated. And I thought, well, if I feel like this at the moment, then my heart is obviously not in it, and I shouldn't be in it. So initially, Carvis, who had been Carvis Tarabi, had been
like a roadie, wasn't he?
Say again?
He was a roadie, wasn't he, to start?
That's it. Yeah. Guitar tech, yeah. And I always said that if I couldn't do it, he should do it, you know. And so he was brought in to do the gigs that were covering those things. It was 3 gigs they did at the garage, playing all that old stuff, and it came out as a couple of albums, I think. You know, all of the stuff spread over 2 albums. But at the time, I don't think we were sure of what was going on that year, and that was towards the end of the year. And then on New Year's Eve, Tim sort of said to me, "So what's happening then? What you going to do?" And by that point, I just assumed I had left, but it wasn't. It was a bit like, "Oh, well, I'm not coming back. That's it," you know, sort of thing. Which is really weird because we're still really good mates, but and remain so, you know, forever, you know. And but it was just like, oh no, that's it, we're done now. At the end, you know, and it was a bit weird, really. I don't ever quite. I mean, yeah, it wasn't like, right, I'm off, I'm leaving. There was no falling out or anything. It just sort of seemed to just happen. And I think there's one time I got really sad about it, but I think I was a bit tired and emotional. It was at the end of the last tour Cardiacs ever did, was in 2007, and I had a funny little band called the Goddamn Whores that supported them. They're just a funny little punk band, and Jim dropped me back at my house at the end of it, and I ended up just crying, saying, "God, I've really missed it. I really missed playing in the band, you know, and stuff." And he said to me then, he said, "Well, you know, there'll always be a place for you if you ever want to come back, you know." And but you know, it never happened in the end. Sort of thing,
it's a. I mean, I have a similar thing with IQ, because they're another band that have got this huge, you know, not huge following, but very strong cult following there. And I love the guys. I saw them the other day, and it's like, I was, you know, as soon as I walked into the room and saw them, and we just all had this massive hug. They went on for about, kissed each other, and that was it. And then, you know, there was nothing acrimonious. I just loved the band. And when I watched them, you know, which is the first time I'd ever watched IQ, you know, I watch them play live, and they just got this magic to them. There's, you know, there's a few bands like that, isn't there? That where there's a magic around them, and it's just lovely to be a part of it. You know, it's like being in a family, and you never leave. You know.
I mean, I had exactly the same thing with Cardiacs, because the thing is, I got back off tour the night before the last of these 3 garage gigs they did at the garage, playing that old stuff with Carvis's first gigs. So I thought, I'll go along and see them, you know, and they played this track, Stone Age Dinosaurs, and I just ended up in tears, you know. It was just an overall sort of feeling of of emotion. It was pretty funny because there was like, I mean, my good mate of mine, Lucy, I used to go out with her years ago, and she kind of turned around and saw it happening, and and she was like, "You all right?" And I was just like that. Sort of bit weird. So, sorry, what years were you in IQ, Andy?
I joined him 2005 and I left 2009, so I was in there for 4 years. So
Oh wow!
I did the album Frequency, and I did
Right.
they did a DVD which has got like two massive concerts on, and then I did another big concert. So when you go on YouTube, there's a lot of me because I played a lot on a lot of those
Right.
tracks. Yeah. So well, one of the things that I think the reason why I want to do these interviews with people is I'm
Mm,
fascinated by people's influences. I'm fascinated by
yeah.
your influences, and I'm fascinated by Tim's influences and how those work
Yeah.
within there. Because a lot of the time, so for example, here's one. How influenced were you by, say, jazz fusion and funk, especially funk? Because cardiacs are funky and sing to God. For
Mm.
all that, there's a groove to it. There's a soul. I can pick it up that in there. I could pick up.
Uh,
So how much of that is in you?
this is really funny. There's loads of it in me,
Yeah,
absolutely loads, because my older brother is his name's Ed Poole. He's a
yeah,
bass
yeah,
player
yeah,
too, sort of things. And I was from an early age in the '70s. I was exposed to a hell of a lot of this things like Weather Report and stuff like the funk stuff as well. Things like the Brothers Johnson and Stanley Clark and all that kind of stuff. And so I was exposed to that, and I really liked it. But the first stuff I got into was Chic. When I actually started buying out albums and singles. And my first single was Good Times because I was immediately drawn to the bass on it and that chunky guitar
yeah,
funk style. Well, so I loved all that, and I loved Earth, Wind and Fire and Michael Jackson, Off the Wall, and that Jackson stuff that sort of happened around the late '70s, uh, right, right up to about '81. It was really, really. I mean, I loved it. I was so into it. But at the same time, Police came along for me. I'd heard "Can't Stand Losing You," and I punk was a bit of a dirty word in my house. And at the time, because I was so young, I thought because they had spiky blonde hairstyles that, oh, they must be punks. And it sounded a little bit more raucous than the music I'd
mm,
heard before. But it was undeniably addictive, sort of thing. So I really got into that as well. And I mean, I've said this before, but like I had two older brothers that played bass, and I thought if I started playing bass, they'd think I was copying them, and so I thought, well, I'll take up guitar instead then. So that was my first instrument, and my main influences at that point were Nile Rodgers and Andy Summers. So it's a bit of a mixture of two different things. But yeah, funk, jazz, fusion. Definitely there for me a very kind of small extent. I'd say it was there for Tim. I mean, I think he liked a little bit of Weather Report and stuff, and I guess some of Zappa's stuff can get a bit like that, and he liked that, But I don't think he was massively into all that stuff. He liked things like Henry Cow and the Art Bears, and God, he liked loads of stuff. I mean, we all liked,
What about
yeah,
something like
yeah.
Gentle Giant? Did he
Oh
like
God, yeah.
he did he like Gentle Giant?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, me and Bob we used to listen to an album called "The Power and Glory,"
Mm.
which I was really, really into. But yeah, Tim definitely listened to a bit of that. The one he didn't listen to that I did was Sparks, and a lot of people think, oh, he must be a Sparks fan, but he's not. But I love Sparks, more of the '70s stuff, particularly sort of thing. But
When
yeah.
I was in IQ, we used to
Mm.
do the Astoria once a year, and they would
Oh,
always do cover versions, and we would do things. I can remember we did "It's a Sin" by Pet
yeah,
Shop
yeah.
Boys, and we did
Good stuff.
we do Crazy Horses, uh, by the Osmonds, and
Oh yeah,
yeah,
great band.
I can remember one Christmas show we decided to do "This Town" by the Sparks, and
Oh,
it was too hard. It was
oh,
just
really?
so hard to play, yeah. And I can remember when I was in Frost one Christmas, we decided to do the Roy Wood I wish it could be Christmas every day,
Yeah.
and that was really hard to play as well.
Oh
I can
God,
remember
yeah. This is
struggling my way through these tunes, But
no, this is
yes,
good
the spot.
stuff. Yeah.
It's really interesting hearing you talk because I sort of was into music in the 70s, and I was listening to
Yeah.
like B.A. Robertson and Barbara Dickinson and all these people. But the tracks that really fired me up originally was pop music by M,
Oh
which
God,
I
yeah.
love that song, and it turned out to be
Yeah.
all the guys out of level 42 on that,
Exactly. Yeah.
and Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick, and
Yeah.
then it was the Police, new wave of British heavy metal, and also all that ska stuff. I was massively into
Oh.
Specials and Madness. I mean, I still think Madness are one of the greatest bands that have ever existed. They astonished me. I,
I mean, yeah, the songwriting in that stuff. I mean, there's one album in particular that is just one of my favorite albums of all time. Is Rise and Fall. You know that album at
yeah,
all?
God, yeah, yeah.
It's almost like the Sergeant Pepper.
Yeah, yeah. They're just,
But
it's incredible. It's like you listen to, a track comes on, like the other day, Baggy Trousers comes on. And I'm
yeah,
thinking, everyone just accepts this. This is like a really popular song, and
yeah,
everyone accepts. And then when you actually listen to it, it's utterly bonkers.
it's mental.
And
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
that verse, where it's just like one note, da 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 da, and then they drop down, da 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 da, and then chromatic, da 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 da. And you think,
yeah.
no one's made pop records like this, and then the next bit is, it's all like this. It's just, and
Well,
I
it's
just, Cardiac seemed to, for me, take all these things that I grew up with, bits of jazz, bits of
yeah,
prog, the punk that was around when I first came in, then Madness and
yeah.
XTC and all that stuff. It just seems to put
Oh, yeah.
all of
Sorry,
that.
Yeah, XTC was a massive one. We all loved XTC. You still do, But sorry, oh God, you don't have to answer this. But what year were you born?
1968.
Ah,
Like
I'm 69. I
yours,
thought we
yeah.
were.
I think it was a bit. It's a bit of a gift, really, because I think our age group.
Yeah,
It's that new wave of British heavy metal, like you said, the Police. They were that coming into sort of 12 years
yeah,
old. I was 12 years old in 1980. You would have been 12 years old in 1981. God,
yeah.
it was a golden age, really.
Oh,
Things
I
like
mean,
Adam and
so,
the Ants. Like I was obsessed with Adam and the Ants,
me too.
and
Me
and it,
too.
you know,
Still am.
I can put that on now, and I go, yeah, this is truly amazing. This is incredible pop
Yeah.
music. I think in the 70s you had the best sort of progressive music. Everything's so out there and weird, and then
Yeah.
we had this incredible pop music, which we sort of took for granted.
Well, yeah, because it was well crafted and quite arty, a lot of it. I mean, I loved the punk thing, but more interesting to me is kind of like when punk bands started branching out. So when Pill formed,
Oh,
bands. I love Pill and Wire and bands like that. And God, I mean, Stranglers, another great band. But I no, it was great. But the chart music. I mean, I was thinking about this today. The fact that in the top 5 in 1982, or in 81, you had "Oh Superman" by Laurie Anderson, which
yeah,
is ridiculous that was ever in
yeah.
the charts. Ghosts by Japan is their biggest hit, and it's like this Stockhausen influence punch, weird noises and stuff. How did that stuff get in the charts? But it was great. There was so much diversity in the charts back then, and I thought pop music, and then you would get like a real kind of basic sort of pop song, like I don't know, "Favorite Shirts" by Haircut 100, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
All
yeah,
part of it, but really great stuff like the Associates, "Party Fears 2," or Club Country and all that stuff. I mean, there was just so much great stuff then, and as I say, Japan and God, I mean, too, and Gary Newman. I love Gary Newman. He used to get a lot of stick at the time, but I always not so much now. I think people have kind of come around to him a lot more now. But yeah, I mean, you know, you don't have to. I've never had that. I was never bogged down with that whole thing of you have to be a technically good or proficient musician to make good music. I mean, it's just one way of doing it. I think much more important than that is ideas, character, and soul, the real meaning of the word. And sometimes you can get a musician that's not technically that great at all, but they just come up with something that moves you. You know, and I'm more interested in that than anything being technical for technical's sake. Because Cardiacs were never that. We never wrote complex stuff because it was impressive. As what someone reviewed us once and said that we made music that to impress each other and our mates. You know, it was absolute nonsense. But yeah, easy.
Well,
lazy.
I always felt the greatest composer in rock music was Frank Zappa, but Frank Zappa's got a sort of snidey sneer about him, and I felt that Cardiacs had the same. There's the same weight of composition, but without that snidey sneer. It is really honest.
Yeah.
There's a. I think it's the Englishness. See, I have this big thing about Englishness. It's a.
Yeah.
I grew up listening to loads of, American music, blues, jazz, all those types of things. But
Oh wow.
there's an English. I call it the English aesthetic, and I think when you put those two things together, it's like that's what the Beatles is. That's
the Kinks, XTC.
See, yeah, all those, Oasis, Storm. See,
Yeah.
all of them have this thing, which is fantastic. And for me, Cardiacs just have that in bucket loads. It's like concentrated. Yeah. It's a lot for many people. I can understand it. But it's like concentrated.
Yeah, but I tell you what though. I tell you what, you cannot fake that. Some people have just got that, and I've in the past, I've tried to. Occasionally, I've thought, why don't I try singing in a different kind of accent? Experimented with a kind of transatlantic American accent, and every time I do, just sound like I come from Swindon. The R's just become Swindon R's.
Well, John, I mean, we're up to our last 2 minutes. Do you want to do another session? Shall we get another one going? So what I'm going to do is we'll finish up here. This is the end of part 1. I don't know whether I'll put it all in the same one. I don't know how it'll work. I never know what I'm doing.
Do you edit this stuff?
Oh no. No, not at all.
Just as is.
Yeah, no. Well, people see what they get, what they see, and they see what they get. That's the way it is. They don't like it. They can go and watch some posh channel where people know what they do, but we don't know what we're doing, do we? So, and the thing is,
are we allowed to swear?
Yeah, I think so. Well, it says we got 1 minute 50, so I'm going to jump out of this one, and then I'll send you another link on Facebook, and we'll go into part 2, which is now because we've done all the proper stuff. We've talked about other stuff. We could just chat, and we'll see what happens. All right, mate. So
okay, mate.
I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Cheers, mate. I've got to stop recording now.